And good evening. We begin with breaking news out of Teller County right now. We're about to hear from El Paso County, Teller County District Attorney Dan May, who says he will announce a decision by the grand jury that's been investigating
regarding the shooting that occurred
on
August 3rd,
let's take it live right now.
2019. I've just gotten the report and wanted to announce that to the public. I want to say, first of all, this is a horrible tragedy for our community. I've been involved in a number of officer-involved shootings over the years. I can tell you that for the officers, for the family, for this community, it's been a horrible tragedy. I've never known an officer who was involved in a shooting to ever brag about it, and I've been doing this for over 35 years, whether they shot and wounded somebody or shot and killed somebody. No officer ever wants to be involved in a shooting. At the same time, I can tell you that my office and I personally have met with Devon's parents. His parents struck me as any other parents who have lost their son tragically, whether it was through a shooting, a horrible traffic accident, that suddenly they get that call that they've lost a loved one. And I got to tell you, when we first met them, they looked just like any other parent who were stunned, didn't know what feelings to have, didn't know how to act, didn't know even what to say or ask at the time. And they struck me just like any other parent I would have met. Certainly this case has had an impact on our community and has had great discussion not only in our community but throughout the state of Colorado. This case we took to the grand jury. I want you to know that the grand jury really took this case very seriously. They had several sessions, not only reviewing the facts of this case, but at the same time reviewing the report that they wanted the public to see in this case that they felt was of great public interest. They again took their jobs very seriously. I can tell you that I have not specifically talked to these grand jurors, but I have talked to many grand jurors. We have one every year, and I ask them about their service. And they always tell me they want the public to know they take their job very seriously, they investigate it thoroughly, and they want to make sure they get to the truth of what happened in the case and get to the right result. And this grand jury, I have no doubt, took the same time in doing this. The grand jury has found the report should be out on state judicial. If it isn't, we'll be putting it out on our website. But they put, one paragraph says, in applying the law to the facts in this situation, there are two grounds upon which an officer is justified in using deadly physical force. One is commonly referred to as fleeing felon. The other is self-defense or defense of others. The grand jury finds Sergeant Vantland and Officer Evanson were legally justified on both grounds. They give a multi-page report that will be released to the public through the chief judge and will be released to the press through state judicial. As I say, we'll also be putting it out on our website. I want to correct or put out a couple things that have come up through this investigation. One of them, there's been a discussion of the fleeing felon. I think it's a Tennessee case that I've heard particularly some defense attorneys talk about, that you cannot shoot a fleeing felon. That particular case they're referring to was a situation where an officer knew that the person was unarmed, was fleeing from the police, and shot them anyway. That is correct. You can't shoot an unarmed fleeing felon. Colorado law is very carefully crafted that if the officer has a reasonable belief that the person has used a deadly weapon in a crime and is still armed, that they can use deadly force to prevent that person from being a fleeing felon with that deadly weapon. And that was one of the grounds that the grand jury would have looked at. You'll see the law that's in there. It's very clear, it's very specific. Obviously in this situation they found that there was a reason to believe that a gun was used in a robbery from the information the officers had before this situation, that the person was still armed when they were fleeing, and in fact you'll see in here they talk about fleeing into a park or a school area where other people could be with that person with the weapon. I know that there's been some other things out there. One of them in particular was, should the El Paso County Sheriff's Office be the ones who did the investigation in this case? Number one, I want you to know the grand jury is an absolute independent body. This is their investigation, this is their report. Although we are the ones that call the grand jury and my attorney is in the grand jury asking questions, my attorney actually works for the grand jury. It is the attorney for them. Grand jurors are able to ask any questions they want. Grand jurors are able to subpoena any witnesses they want. Grand jurors are able to order the tests, if they feel that those are needed, scientific tests, in order to resolve these questions. This grand jury, we believe, was very thorough in feeling they had all the information they needed to make this decision. So it is their independent decision and they say so. Second, quite frankly, I think it's a red herring. This case is on 2 videos. As part of their grand jury report, they are releasing the body cams, but quite frankly, those body cams are in the public already. Those are some of the best views of an officer-involved shooting I have ever seen. And believe me, I think I've seen more and been involved in more officer-involved shootings than anybody in the state of Colorado in evaluating them. There isn't anything left. You see what happened before, you see what happens during, you see what happens after. Quite frankly, the grand jury can view that same tape at the same time. The thing that is left really for investigation is what were the officers thinking at the time they fired their guns, because that is one of the relevant things you've got to decide in whether this is a justified shooting. So quite frankly, I think it's a red herring to say the El Paso County Sheriff's Office investigated this. It was an independent body, and everybody in the public can see exactly what happened in this case. I've had the defense counsel at times have said some things that I think need to be corrected, and I don't know what they're going to say today. They have local counsel, Dan Kay, who we've been working with very closely. You also have 2 attorneys up in Denver, and quite frankly, the 2 don't seem to be communicating. I remember in one of their first press conferences, they said that we had not met with Devon's family. That's not true. We had met with them, and I had personally met with them before they announced that to the public. Danny Kay was at that same meeting. He knows we were there. So I don't know if it's a miscommunication on the part of Devon's family's attorneys, or if there's something that's going on in Denver that they're twisting what's happening in these situations. I can tell you that Dan Kay asked us to take this to the grand jury and thanked us when we told him that we were taking it to the grand jury. Then I see in the afternoon the attorneys up in Denver complaining it's too little too late. Well, they know how these processes work. You don't impanel a grand jury immediately. You do have to gather evidence. You do have to have do this in an appropriate manner going forward. I think we put out there the average case takes 120 days for us to make a decision. This case is not any different than any others. So it seems like every time we have a communication with local counsel, I'm hearing a different communication up in Denver. So I want to set the records straight on that. I want to say again that we very much appreciate the time the grand jurors took. We respect their decision in this case. You'll note in their report they talked about the split-second decisions our officers have to make. These are not decisions our officers want to make. It is a dangerous job. They're out there trying to protect themselves and the community, but it is decisions they are trained to make. You'll see in here it talks about their training and how they followed their training in this case. It's a very unfortunate situation, but we respect their decision, and we respect the decision finding that the officers were justified in this case. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Mr. Knight, you
Yes.
mentioned a number of reasons why a grand jury might be beneficial in a case like this, but I want to make sure we interpret you clearly as to why you did impanel one. At the request of the family, for their thorough nature, for the independent nature, all 3. I just want to make sure we're clear on why you chose that.
I think again, Devon Bailey's attorneys asked us to impanel a grand jury. It is one of the things that we factored in this case. Certainly there was some question about an independent decision, and a grand jury is an independent body from anybody else in the system. It is unique in our Constitution. I can tell you the grand juries are selected once a year in January. They are random members of our community who take their job very seriously. Anybody in our community could get a grand jury subpoena. In fact, most of them don't even know that they're on the grand jury. They just see the subpoena and don't realize what they're getting involved in for the next year. We felt it was an appropriate one to take to the grand jury under the circumstances of this case. It was a very high-profile case, and we think that they worked very hard in reaching their decision.
So this was no true bill then?
It is a no true bill.
What's the vote split?
My understanding is it was unanimous.
How many?
I believe it's either, I'm not sure, it's either going to be 11 or 12 grand jurors.
When was the last time the 4th has called a grand jury in an officer-involved shooting?
Last year. She asked when was the last time we had a grand jury for an officer-involved shooting. It was last year. So it is something that I have to tell you, I've been under a lot of different district attorneys. Originally, I believe it was Bob Russell took all officer-involved shootings to grand jury. Barney Opit took none. When John Southers came in, I was his chief trial attorney, so I reviewed the officer-involved shootings. He felt if it was very clear that the officer would decide, if not, then we would take it to a grand jury. I've had the same philosophy. That's the same one Jeannie Smith had. So I've had several cases that I've taken over the years from FBI agents, quite frankly, State Patrol, CSPD, other agencies to the grand jury when we felt it was appropriate.
An
How do you
officer
make
was
the
charged
decision?
about a year ago in an officer-involved shooting. Is that a grand jury case?
Yes.
What was his name?
I do not recall off the top of my head.
How do you make that decision whether to take it to a grand jury? What factors do you consider?
Again, if it's extremely clear one way or the other, then our office will make that decision. If we think that it's something that's appropriate for the community to make the decision, then we take it to the grand jury. I've probably taken, my first year in office, I believe I took one to the grand jury, first or second year. It was an officer who shot through a fence and shot somebody in the back. So this isn't even the second one that I've taken to a grand jury.
Did Governor Polis's office reach out to you at all about wanting to take this to a grand jury as well?
My communication with Governor Polis's office, I guess, have been through the media. I know that he talked directly to John Suthers, is my understanding, but his office has never reached out to me. I will say that I had quite a few conversations with the Attorney General. He and I personally spoke. I spoke to people in his office at the same time. So he and I had quite a few discussions about the appropriateness of this case being handled by our office. I will say, it'd be nice if I was elected just to make the easy decisions. I was also elected to make the tough decisions, and that's what the people of this community expect. I think that they've elected me to make the decisions in this case, and that's one of the bases in deciding what district attorney they want. These are not easy decisions, but I can tell you at the same time, we don't keep a list, but I informally went around our office a number of weeks ago, and we came up with at least 30 law enforcement officers my office has prosecuted since I've been the elected district attorney. We hold police to the same standards we hold the public. If an officer does a crime, they should be prosecuted for it. One of the attorneys I assigned to this case is Amy Fitch. She has prosecuted herself at least 2 Colorado Springs police officers. One of those was Carrier, if you remember him a number of years ago, one of the higher profile cases. And again, he's a good example that if you've done a crime, we're going to hold you accountable just like we would anybody else in the public.
To be clear, those 30 officers, that's not an officer-involved shootings. That could be anything, right?
That could be anything. That's anything, quite frankly, from domestic violence to theft to sexual assault on a child to unlawful use of force. It's whatever crime may have been done, we've charged them.
And did you say 3 or 30, just so I hear you correctly?
We've done at least 30. Since I've been district attorney, we've prosecuted at least 30 law enforcement officers, including Colorado Springs Police Department officers.
Also, I was going to ask you just how you think the grand jury came to this decision, but you were also citing a couple of examples
I
about
think
looking at old case law. I just want to make sure that's kind of your
the
interpretation
report
of
is there. It's a multi-page, and I think the grand jury can speak for themselves and exactly how they arrived at this decision.
Do you know how many meetings? You said several meetings?
I'm not sure how many exactly off the top of my head.
Legislators have started talking about a law that would change the system that Colorado uses to investigate officer-involved shootings. Do you think that system should be changed? I've been here through a couple of reforms for officer-involved shootings. I can tell you that the current practice that we have in the 4th Judicial District is a result of the legislative reforms of just a few years ago. I think it was 3-4 years ago that they did a new reform of how they wanted these investigated. I can tell you in the 4th Judicial District, my office investigated every officer-involved shooting until that time. They specifically put in the statute that DA's offices could not do the investigation. They wanted us to strictly do the prosecution side, and they wanted these joint task force put together. The task force put together in the 4th Judicial District absolutely complies with the reform law they did just 3-4 years ago. So I think it's a good thing to always look at, are there reforms that are needed? But quite frankly, I think our system is about as fair as it can get right now. And certainly our grand jury system is as fair as it's been in certainly the last 200 years.
One of the Bailey family attorneys, Daryl Kilmer, just said to me in a statement that it's no surprise that a flawed investigation obtained a flawed result. Do you ever respond to that?
I think I've responded a little bit already. I think there's been some advocacy coming out of the Denver attorneys from the beginning of this, and I pointed out 2 examples where the information that I'm being even told by Dan Kay, who's the representative here, is different than what they're seeing up there. I do not think our system is flawed. I think our grand juries take this very seriously, and quite frankly, again, this is on film. You can see exactly what happened. This isn't something that's done in the dark of night or that you don't know, and so I think that to say that it's a flawed system is a red herring in this case.
Ari Newman just sent a statement that said, this is the exact reason why we called for an independent investigation and an independent prosecution. Does that mean anything any different than what's already happened?
I think there was a totally independent investigation, a totally independent decision by this grand jury. I think they took their jobs very seriously, and I respect what the grand jury has done in this case. I don't think they had any agendas in this case. I don't think the grand jury had any preconceived outcomes. I think they took their role very seriously, just as any other jurors would in my community, and they really worked hard to try to get to what was the correct result.
So we should look for that report through the court.
Yes. Thank you very much.